They burned her records, destroyed her statues, rewrote the books. For centuries, powerful men decided the world would never know her name. They almost succeeded. But history has a habit of bleeding through the cracks. And this woman, she refused to stay buried. If you've ever been told your story doesn't matter, this video is for you. Stay until the end, because the truth they tried to hide will change how you see every history book you've ever read. Subscribe now, because we uncover the warriors they don't teach in school. Her name was Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra, and in the 3rd century AD, she did what no woman in the ancient world had dared to do. She declared war on Rome. Not with words, not with diplomacy, with an army, with military strategy, with fire and iron. At the peak of her power, the empire she commanded stretched from Egypt to the borders of Asia Minor, controlling nearly a third of Rome's entire eastern territory. She was not a myth. She was not a legend assembled centuries later to inspire the powerless. She was real, documented, feared, and then deliberately and systematically buried by the men who came after her. To understand Zenobia, you have to understand the world she was born into. The year is the mid-3rd century AD. The Roman Empire is fracturing at every seam. Historians call this period the crisis of the 3rd century, nearly 5 decades of relentless civil war, devastating plague, catastrophic economic collapse, and military humiliation on multiple frontiers. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome would see over 20 men claim the title of emperor. Most of them were assassinated. Most of them lasted fewer than 2 years. The empire that had once ruled the known world was bleeding from wounds it had inflicted entirely on itself. The eastern frontier was the most volatile edge of all. Along the Syrian desert, Rome faced the Sassanid Persian Empire, aggressive, expansionist, and battle-hardened. In 260 AD, the unthinkable happened. The Roman Emperor Valerian was captured in battle by the Persian king Shapur I, a sitting Roman emperor taken prisoner. It was the single greatest military humiliation in Roman history to that point. The Roman Eastern Empire was exposed, vulnerable, and desperate. Into this fracture point, one city rose like something that should not have been possible: Palmyra. Located in what is today central Syria, deep in the Syrian desert, Palmyra was one of the most remarkable cities in the ancient world. Silk roads, spice routes, and caravan trails carrying gold, ivory, and rare goods from Persia, Arabia, and India all converged on its colonnaded streets. It was cosmopolitan in a way that Rome itself rarely managed, a city where Aramaic, Greek, Arabic, and Latin were all spoken in the same market on the same afternoon, where temples to multiple gods stood within walking distance of each other, where merchants from a dozen cultures negotiated deals in the shade of towering limestone columns. Palmyra survived between 2 superpowers, not by being stronger than both, but by being smarter than both. This was the city that shaped Zenobia. This was the world she was trained from birth to navigate and eventually to dominate.
Her full name in the Aramaic she was raised speaking was Bathzabai, daughter of Zabai. The Romans called her Zenobia Septimia. Ancient sources describe her in terms rarely applied to women of her era. She was fluent in at least 4 languages: Aramaic, Greek, Egyptian, and Latin. She studied philosophy, military history, and the administrative machinery of empire. She hunted lions and rode long distances on horseback alongside her soldiers, refusing to travel in the covered carriages considered appropriate for women of her station. She held court debates with philosophers and scholars and gave as well as she received. She reportedly claimed descent from Cleopatra VII of Egypt, and while modern historians approach that specific lineage with some skepticism, what is beyond any debate is this: Zenobia governed like a queen who believed she was heir to greatness, and she acted like one every single day. She married Odaenathus, the king of Palmyra, a general of exceptional ability who had rebuilt Rome's eastern credibility after the Valerian catastrophe. Odaenathus launched 2 punishing campaigns against the Persians, driving them back across the Euphrates and rescuing Rome's eastern frontier when Rome itself lacked the strength to do so. For this, the Roman emperor granted him extraordinary authority over the eastern provinces. Palmyra, under Odaenathus, became the indispensable eastern pillar of the Roman world. But Zenobia was not a passive figure standing behind that pillar. She was embedded in every political decision, managing court alliances, building foreign relations, and quietly constructing the administrative architecture of a state that was growing more powerful than anyone in Rome yet fully appreciated. They had a son together, named Vabilathus. The family, together, was something Rome had come to depend upon without realizing how completely it had ceded power to them. Then, in 267 or 268 AD, everything changed in a single night. Odaenathus was assassinated. So was Haron, his eldest son from a previous marriage. The precise circumstances remain one of ancient history's genuinely unresolved mysteries. Some ancient sources name a jealous nephew called Maeonius. Others suggest darker currents entirely: Roman political intrigue, Persian intelligence operations, or factional violence within Palmyra's own court. What is certain is that in one act of violence, the most important military figure on Rome's eastern frontier was dead. The heir and successor, Vabilathus, was a child, and with no ceremony and no hesitation, the full weight of power transferred to Zenobia. She saw it, she grabbed it, she did not mourn passively. As regent for her young son, Zenobia moved with a clarity of purpose that stunned the Eastern Roman world. She did not position herself as a caretaker queen, holding the throne warm until a man could claim it. She restructured and expanded the Palmyrene military with speed and discipline. She deepened alliances with tribal leaders, provincial governors, and local elites across the eastern Mediterranean. She brought into her inner circle some of the greatest intellectual minds of the age. Chief among them, the philosopher Cassius Longinus, widely regarded as one of the finest literary and philosophical scholars of the 3rd century. Longinus became her chief advisor, her primary speechwriter, and her closest intellectual companion. Under his influence, Zenobia's court at Palmyra became a genuine center of learning and culture. Under her own direction, it was simultaneously becoming a military and political machine of the first order. Rome, consumed by its own internal chaos and the relentless parade of dying emperors, did not move quickly enough to recognize what was building in the eastern desert. In 270 AD, Zenobia acted. She dispatched her finest general, a commander named Zabdas, at the head of a Palmyrene army into Egypt. The choice of Egypt was not impulsive, it was precisely calculated. Egypt was the single most strategically vital province in the entire Roman Empire. It produced the grain that fed Rome's cities. Its tax revenues filled Roman coffers. Its port city of Alexandria was the economic and cultural hub of the eastern Mediterranean. Whoever controlled Egypt controlled Rome's lifeline. Zenobia understood this with perfect clarity. The Roman prefect of Egypt, a capable officer named Tenagino Probus, mobilized his forces and marched to stop the advance. He failed. His army was defeated. Probus himself was killed in the fighting. Alexandria, the city of Cleopatra, of the great library, of centuries of accumulated wealth and learning, fell to Palmyra. Egypt was Zenobia's. The conquest did not pause. Over the following months, Palmyrene forces swept north and west through the Levant with relentless speed. Province after province came under her authority. Then the advance pushed further still, deep into Asia Minor, into Roman provinces of what is now modern Turkey. City after city either surrendered or was taken by force. Zenobia did not govern her conquests with gratuitous cruelty. She positioned herself as a legitimate ruler, one that local populations, exhausted by decades of Roman instability, might actually prefer. She issued coins bearing her son's image and, increasingly, her own. She administered, she held court, she presented Palmyra not as a foreign invader, but as a more stable, more culturally sophisticated alternative to a Rome that had spent 50 years consuming itself. At the height of her power, the Palmyrian Empire controlled Egypt, the Levant, and large portions of Asia Minor. She was governing, commanding, and defending nearly a third of what had once been Rome's undisputed eastern domain. Generals who had once dismissed her name now whispered it carefully around their campfires. Then she made the move that sealed her fate and guaranteed her legend in the same stroke. Around 271 A.D., Zenobia formally declared independence from Rome. She proclaimed Vabilaphus as Augustus, the title of a Roman emperor. Herself, she took the title of Augusta. This was not the posture of a regional client queen managing a border territory. This was a direct, unambiguous claim to imperial authority, issued on official coinage, dispatched in official correspondence, declared for the entire ancient world to read. In Rome, Emperor Aurelian, the hardened general who had spent years hammering the fractured empire back together through sheer force and iron will, received the declaration. He understood immediately what it required. There would be no negotiation. There would be war. Aurelian was one of the most formidable military commanders Rome had ever produced. Historians of the period would later give him the title Restitutor Orbis, Restorer of the World. He moved east in 272 A.D. with a battle-tested Roman army, retaking Asia Minor as he advanced and driving Palmyrian garrisons southward. The first decisive engagement came at the Battle of Imme, near the ancient city of Antioch in modern Syria. Zenobia had ridden with her forces throughout the campaign. Her greatest military asset was her heavy armored cavalry, the cataphracts, iron-clad horsemen, considered the most devastating heavy cavalry in the Eastern world. Aurelian had studied them carefully. He understood they were nearly unstoppable in a direct charge, so he did not offer one. He allowed them to charge, then ordered his own lighter cavalry into a controlled retreat, drawing the armored Palmyrian horses forward under the scorching Syrian sun, exhausted beneath the crushing weight of their iron plating until they could barely move. Then he wheeled, counterattacked, and destroyed them. The Battle of Imme was a Roman victory. Zenobia fell back to Imme, the city of modern Homs. A second battle was fought there. The Romans won again. Palmyra itself was now directly threatened, and Zenobia made a final decision that reflected not surrender, but calculated desperation. She would ride east across the Syrian desert and seek military intervention from the Sassanid Persian Empire, the one power on earth capable of matching Rome in open battle. She rode hard across open desert, pushing toward the Euphrates River and the Persian territory beyond it. She came extraordinarily close. Roman cavalry caught her at the river's edge just as she was preparing to board a boat heading east toward Persian rescue. She was taken prisoner. The woman who had conquered Egypt, administered an empire spanning 3 regions, and challenged the most powerful military machine in the Western world, was captured at a desert riverbank, alone, reaching toward a future that had slipped permanently beyond her grasp. Palmyra fell to Aurelian. His initial occupation was measured, the population was spared, the city itself left largely intact. But when Palmyra rose in revolt shortly after his departure, killing the garrison he had left behind, Aurelian returned with cold, final fury. This time there was no restraint. The city was sacked, its towers were demolished, its treasuries emptied. The jewel of the Syrian desert was reduced to rubble. The philosopher Longinus, Zenobia's most trusted advisor, her intellectual companion, the man who had helped shape her vision of empire, was executed on Aurelian's personal orders. Zenobia herself was transported to Rome for display in his triumph. In 274 AD, Aurelian held one of the grandest triumphal processions in Roman history, celebrating his reconquest of the fractured empire. Zenobia walked in that procession. Ancient accounts describe her adorned with enormous jewels and bound with golden chains so heavy she reportedly required attendants to support her weight as she moved through the streets of Rome. Even Aurelian, it seems, understood that some prisoners were too magnificent for iron. What happened to her after the triumph sits in historical shadow. Some ancient sources indicate she died shortly afterwards from illness or deliberate refusal to eat. Other accounts, which a number of modern scholars find more persuasive, suggest she survived, was granted a comfortable villa near Tivoli outside Rome, married a Roman senator, and lived her remaining years in relative peace. The historical record here is fragmented, partial, and unreliable, and that incompleteness was not entirely accidental.
In the centuries that followed, the men who controlled Roman historical narrative had every incentive to minimize her. Coins she had minted were melted, inscriptions were defaced or removed. The primary Roman sources that addressed her directly, including the Historia Augusta, a compilation assembled generations after her death and considered deeply unreliable by modern scholars, framed her story in ways designed to diminish her agency and redirect all credit toward Aurelian. Her military genius was acknowledged only as context for his victory. Her empire was treated as a temporary disorder that Rome corrected, an episode rather than a civilization. The woman who had governed Egypt with documented administrative competence, built a multicultural court of genuine intellectual distinction, conquered 3 major Roman regions with strategic precision, and very nearly succeeded in breaking the Eastern Empire permanently, she was filed carefully and deliberately into the footnotes of Roman history. But she refused, even in death, to stay there. Arab historians kept her memory alive through the medieval period. The great Arab chronicler Al-Tabari documented her reign centuries later, calling her by her Arabic name, Al-Zaba, recording her as a queen of extraordinary courage and political intelligence. Medieval Islamic scholars wrote of her with admiration undimmed by any need to justify a Roman triumph. Modern archaeologists excavating Palmyra throughout the 20th century found her beneath the sand. Coins bearing her image, inscriptions recording her full imperial titles, papyri recovered from Egypt dating to the Palmyrian occupation that documented her administration in meticulous bureaucratic detail. In 2015, the ancient ruins of Palmyra made global headlines when the extremist group ISIS occupied and deliberately destroyed portions of the site, destroying the same stones Zenobia had once governed, almost 17 centuries after her empire fell. Even in destruction, she remained newsworthy. Every decade, more evidence surfaces. Every piece of evidence says the same thing. She was real, she was extraordinary, and the empire she built deserved far more than the footnote it received. Zenobia of Palmyra was not a symbol or a metaphor assembled after the fact. She was a woman who learned 4 languages, built a functioning empire from a desert trading city, conquered the grain heart of Rome, controlled 3 regions simultaneously, and made the greatest military emperor of her age spend 2 full years and enormous resources to defeat her. She did this in the 3rd century AD, in a world that had written absolutely no role for her except silence. She rewrote that role herself, in stone, in blood, and in gold. And the men who tried to erase her, they are remembered today largely because her name survived the attempt. History does not belong to the men who wrote it. It belongs to the people who lived it, and Zenobia lived it, in fire, in blood, and in absolute, unbreakable defiance. She was erased once. Don't let it happen twice. Share this video, because the stories they hide are always the ones that matter most. Subscribe to this channel. Every week, we resurrect the warriors, the rebels, and the visionaries that history tried to silence. The truth doesn't die. It just waits for someone brave enough to speak it.